So has anyone heard of the new book by Sophie Lewis that's called Enemy Feminisms? Really worth dipping into. It's definitely got a sense of humour here and there, peppering the text on a very serious topic that is requiring of urgent examination, which Sophie Lewis has done. By the way, I may have Sophie's surname, but we're not related. And the other thing is Sophie is English, or part English, as she says in her, I think, prologue to the book. One of the interesting things, though, is the way in which she tackles TERFism as an outgrowth of imperial and white feminism, or as an embodiment of the same. So I really do think it's worth reading, coming from this foremost writer, who also wrote a book called Family Abolition. She's a fantastic feminist who has done her homework and her thinking. I was going to entitle this video TERF Talking Points, but you just never know who'll end up arriving at your channel if you put such keywords in the subject line. But one TERF talking point, one of the TERF talking points that I was thinking about was the following. If we're all predators, sexual predators, right, which is commonly how we're depicted within TERF discourses, and apparently they have a whole database of evidence, right, to say that just because you're trans feminine, trans woman, or however you identify, not only are you trying to take over women's space and abolish women's rights through your ideology, because of course we have an ideology, don't we? And that ideology means false consciousness and contagion, and something that's going to destroy the world, particularly for these women. It's quite amazing how this turn has occurred to figure us or prefigure us as predators as well. This does come from originally that fabulous book known as Transsexual Empire, the Transsexual Empire by Janice Raymond. And so some of the tropes have not changed since the 70s. They've been recycled. And the evidence provided for the categorical threat of trans women to all women is people who have already committed, been listed as committing heinous sexual crimes, sexual assault, are doing the same to women post-transition. Now, that's very interesting to me, because how does that get to represent all trans women, for example? How is that a threat to all women just by being, as I am, trans and a woman? Sorry, no. First of all, there's nothing about oneself that avowedly would allow someone to undertake such a crime. It just beggars belief. But further to the point, many of us are already with histories of sexual violence. People who have become victims of sexual violence do not go on to commit sexual violence. And this is not uncommon, and I don't want to say things that are too triggering here, but it is true for a lot of trans women, whether growing up and being targeted, and this being cloaked in forms of stigmatization and blaming of victims, which happens to women as well, right? Or within the circumstances of relationships of inequality between, for example, trans women and cis men, as well as on the street. The full extent may not be known, but there is some evidence, when it comes to, for example, crimes against young people, children, by perpetrators as being very common within trans women's stories. One really important lesson: survivors do not go on commonly to perpetrate the crime that was perpetrated against them or any form therein. So such TERFs have to rethink both their analysis of what that kind of form of abuse as experienced by children constitutes, as found in the stories of a lot of trans women, and also on what basis they're making this extension beyond someone who's a known offender and then goes on to perpetrate such crimes, for example, within jails, after they've demanded access to transition therapies. And the greater number of us who have absolutely no involvement in that. It's really a terrible form of epistemic and symbolic violence to group all individuals categorically on the basis of their trans status as being a risk in terms of being some kind of sexual predator. That's all I'll say. TERF talking point number 1. Thanks for listening.